Hey there, YouTube. I thought tonight we'd go over some software that I use for making my patterns. I've designed a couple of packs with this. I haven't made any packs from my patterns yet, but I did make a fur trapper's hat with this software, and it worked out really, really well. And the nice thing about this software is it's made for making clothing. So you can put in variables for your measurements and then apply those variables to a pattern, and it changes the size. Case in point, for me, I made a Ushanka or a trapper's hat for myself, and when my daughter wanted me to make one for her, I measured her head and put that measurement into my pattern and was able to instantly spit out a pattern that fit her perfectly. So when it comes to pack making, this is really handy or gear making anyway, because you can change the size based on a set of variables. So it's really easy to do. And the software is not super difficult to learn. It's easier now because their manual's gotten a lot better. When I started, the manual wasn't very good, and I had to I found like one really like 6-year-old YouTube video, and I found a few old forum posts, and then it was a lot of making mistakes with the software. But the software is called Seamly2D. It's open source and it's free, which is I really enjoy. To download it, you go to Seamly.net and scroll down their page and just click on the download for whatever you're using. If you are using a Linux system, odds are it's in the package manager. I know it's in the I think it's in the Debian package repositories, because it's when I put it on my MX Linux Pocket USB, I was able to do apt-get install or apt install Seamly2D, and then on my Arch system, I was able to do pacman install Seamly2D. On Windows, it's just an executable. Mac, I don't have a Mac, so I don't know, but I'm assuming it's fairly straightforward. Once you have the software downloaded and installed, go ahead and open it up, and this is what you'll see. Alright, so to start our pattern here, first we're going to make a new pattern piece, and I'm just going to call this the back of my backpack. And I'm going to make just a simple backpack today to show you how it works. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the variables table under measurements, because I usually try to make all my variables first, because then it's just easier while you're creating whatever you're creating, because you can come back and add variables after the fact, but it's just a little tedious to be switching back and forth, and it's a lot easier just to have your variables ahead of time. But like I said, if you forget one, don't worry about it, because like you can add them at any time. So the first thing I'm going to create is I'm going to create the backpack height. I'm going to go ahead and copy that because I'm lazy. And then the next is going to be the backpack width, and that's going to be depth. And so you can kind of see how easy it is to add these. You just hit the plus symbol, type it in, and add it. Then this is where you can enter in the amount. You can also use a formula here, and I'll get a little bit into that when we start making the pack. You can do this either when you're creating lines or points, or you can do it straight from here. So if they say you wanted the height of your backpack to be double the width, you would just do 2 times backpack underscore width. Oops. If I can spell width. There we go. And because backpack width is under backpack height, it can't find it. So if I move this up here and I set this to say 10, and also, if you don't want to type this out, or you're worried about typing it out, you can hit this right here, and again, we'll get more into this later, but see, there's backpack width times 2, and now my backpack height is double my width. We won't do that here because I kind of know what I want, but you get the idea. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and put all these in, and I will get back to you once I have everything entered. Alright, and we're back. I got all my variables put in. I'm pretty sure I have everything. Height and width of the backpack and the depth, that's pretty self-explanatory. The main zipper length, I put this in as a variable so that you could use, like if you're like me, you have a bunch of extra zippers laying around. You could put this in and we'll calculate the zipper and the gussets based on this length. Same thing for the width here. There's going to be a front pocket on this pack, and I decided the height is always going to be 3/4 of the actual height of the backpack. So you can see where I used a formula to put that in there. The pocket height, this is for the basically the piece that's going to hold the top half of the zipper for the front pocket. The width is again for calculating that, and same as the length here because you can see I'm planning on putting tabs on either end of this zipper. So this way, if your zipper's a little short compared to the width of your pack, it'll auto calculate this based on this formula right here. And it's pretty common like math stuff here. So like the parentheses here is calculated first, and then it divides it into two because we're going to have two tabs. And then the strap max width is the top of the straps, and the min width is the bottom of the straps. So I think that's all of our variables put in. Let's get to making the pack. All right, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go over to our point menu, and we're going to choose the line here, and we're going to start point A, and then I'm just going to click in this general direction because I'm going to fill in all of the variables here. So we want the angle to be 90 degrees so that it's straight up, and then the length is going to go to, we're going to increments here, and then choose backpack height, and OK. And then I'm going to change the type of this line to a dotted line because I'm going to make a reference square that will then build the back of the backpack in. Next, we're going to choose this right angle tool here. What this does is it just creates a right angle from 2 points. So if I put this on point A here, it'll always be a right angle. And we're going to go into increments and choose backpack width. And then we're going to use our right angle tool again. And I could set this to backpack height again, but because I want to only have to change one line at a time, I'm going to set it to length of line A to A1. And hit OK. That way, if I ever change this line right here, these two will correspond together. It would do that if I change the variable as well, but I like doing it this way, so I'm only setting the variable in one place because it just helps with confusion later on if you do end up changing the pattern in any significant way. And then for our last line along the bottom here, we're going to go to line and the line between 2 points, and we'll select A3 to A, and we'll set that to a dotted line. Alright, next we're going to go to the point along line or point along path tool here, and we're going to go to point A to point A1, and you can kind of use your own judgment here for what you want, but I'm going to go with I think 3/4 the height of the backpack. Okay, and then I'm going to do the same thing again on A3 to A2, and I will set its length for A to A4 here. And that way they're equal. And then I will do the same thing, A to A2, but this time I'm going to go the length of A1 to A2, and I'm going to go 1/4 of the distance here. And actually I'm going to change this here to be the length of line A1, A to A1, just so that it's based off of existing lines, not off of the variable. And then we'll do the same thing here. And we will go the length of line A1 to A6. Alright, so what I did here is I created a couple of points along the edge, and we're going to use this to create the curve of our backpack. So we'll go to the curve tool, and I'll select it. I'll go from point A1 to A6. Now, there's probably some math or some science involved here on how to do these curves. I generally end up getting it semi-close to what I want it to be by hand, and then I enter in my data over here. So let's make that a little bigger. I want C1, which should be this angle right here, to be 90, and then I want C2, which is this right here, to be 180. And let's see here. And I usually end up using some combination of the length of these lines just so that I can do it kind of mathematically. So C1 will be the length of this line here. Why don't we go length of A4 to A1, and we'll do, say, 2/3 of that one. And then for this one, we'll do the same. We'll do length of line A1 to A6. And we'll do 1/3 of that one. And so it kind of gives us kind of a nice little curve right there. I may end up adjusting. I think actually I will adjust this to be, yeah, that gives us a little nicer curve there. And you see how I changed this formula? Because I set A5 over here to be the same length as A4, that all adjusts automatically. That's one of the beauties of this program. So now I'll select the curve tool and I'll do the same thing. When you create these curves, you want to go from left to right, because when we go to make this printable, you'll want to go in that order, and that's where it gets a little confusing with these curve tools, and that's why I use that's why I eyeball it this way first and then put the math in, because you see now this is a 360 over here and this is a 90, and that's can sometimes be a little confusing. So then there we go. Alright, so there we have it. We have both of our curves for the top of this pack. I might end up making these a little closer together. So like if I change this to, say, 0.5, that might be a little much. Oops, too much. There, I kind of like that look a little bit better. And then to complete this here, you don't have to do this part, but I usually do just because it helps my sanity, as I will use the line tool and I'll create a line between A6 and A7 here, so that way when you're viewing it, there's a solid line there, and that just helps when you go to make this into a printable pattern. It just a little bit. Again, you don't have to do that because you could get by with just that dotted line, but I think this looks a little nicer. Alright, next we're going to create two bottom curves here. So we're going to do the point along line again. I'm just going to go A to A4. And I'm going to do length of line, A to A4, and I'm going to do, we'll say 20% of that line to start out with, just to see how that looks. That looks pretty good. So then we'll do the same thing here. for this next part, because I want this to be even, I will just use again the A to A8 for that. And A3 to A9. And then we'll go back and put another curve in. Alright, so for this curve, what I did was I set both of the angles to be more or less 90 degrees in relation to where they're at, and then I set the length of the curve to be equal to these lines here. It gives you just kind of a nice, I guess, beveled edge or curve with some relatively with a relatively simple formula, and that'll change according to how big you make the pack. If you want to change that, you can, but this is just kind of a good rule of thumb I've found when making these corners. Alright, now we'll go back to the line tool, line between points, and I'll just connect all of my lines. Alright. And there we have it, the simple back side of our backpack. It's actually going to be the back and the front panel. So we only need to make one for this pattern. Alright, next we're going to go ahead and make our bottom gusset, so go ahead and hit new pattern piece. And this one thing I don't like with this program, it gets a little confusing to try and find point B after when you go to make the new pattern piece, so I just usually scroll in and out. And then I will select the back, and then there's point B for you. So for this piece, I'll pull up my notes here. We'll go ahead and do a point, and we'll go straight up. Make that 90. And for our increments here, we're going to use backpack depth. And I set that at, I believe it was 5 inches. Alright. Next we'll do a 90-degree line. And this is where the math's going to get a little complicated here, because I plan on basing this bottom gusset on the length of the main zipper. And in order to do that, we're going to have to find the circumference of our backpack piece. So to do that, first we'll put in some parentheses. And we will go to measurements. No, we will go to length of lines. There we are. Alright, sorry for the jump there, but I decided to stop recording while I figured out the formula for the circumference of our backpack piece here. It's kind of involved, as you can see, but it's not that hard to figure out. I just went through and just added each each line, each curve together to give us a total circumference of the backpack. And then from that we want to subtract the length of our main zipper. And then I'm going to divide that whole thing by 2 because I plan on doing the gusset on a fold. You don't have to do this, but I just find it's a little easier because with some of these bigger pieces, when you go to print them out and tape them all together, especially if it's just a square like this gusset's going to be, there's really no point in having it be the whole length. You could easily, make it half the length, then cut it on the fold or flip it over, or it's just easier from the pattern side of things. So here's our formula to find the circumference of our back piece minus the length of our main zipper divided by 2, and that gives us the length of our gusset. And then we'll go back into making another square, and this will just be the length of line B to B1, and we'll use the line tool. And there we have our bottom gusset. Alright, next we're going to make our top gusset, so we'll go to a new pattern piece. We'll find out where to put it here. So the width of our top gusset is going to be the depth of our bag minus the main zipper width. Actually, it's going to top of our bag, the depth of our bag, divided by 2 minus the main zipper width. I did this so that essentially we'll have 2 pieces that go on either side of the zipper, and so we need to divide it in half to cut that in half, and then subtract the width of the zipper to make up for the difference. So there's that. And this one's pretty easy for the length because it's just going to be the same length as our main zipper. And then just finish out the square like everything else. Alright, so next we're going to go ahead and make our front pockets. We're in a new pattern piece, and we're going to go pocket. Alright, so we'll make a new point. 90 degrees. I'm going to start out with the height of our pocket. And for simplicity's sake, this pocket is just going to be as wide as the backpack. So now to make our top and bottom piece for the pocket, we will point a long line. Pocket top height. And we'll do that again. There we go. And we'll make a line. This is another occasion where if you wanted to, you could make these outer edges dotted and then put them back in. I'm not going to do for this because it's fairly simple, but just so you'd know. The next point we're going to make is from here to here. And I'm going to set this to the width of my pocket zipper. And then we'll make the corresponding line over here. And we'll connect those. So now I more or less have like the shape that my pocket's going to end up being. There'll be a top piece that's sewn on the bag, the zipper, and then the bottom, which will be just attached to the front of the bag. I could, I guess, make these curved like I did the back of the bag or the back and front, but I'm not going to worry about it here because either I'll move this up just enough to where it's a flat seam, or you can just lay this on there and trim off the excess when you're constructing it. I don't know. When I make this pack, we'll decide how that goes. The next piece, I did add this in. Again, if your zipper's wide enough, you don't have to worry about this. But I did add in an option for some tabs on either side. So if we go to zipper tabs, and this is calculated based on the length of your zipper versus the width of your pack, so that if, say, a zipper you have isn't as wide as your pack, you could put this in and just sew these zipper tabs at either end, and everything would match up. And then I'll go ahead and connect these two just so I know that's what they're there for. And save. The last piece we're going to make is the straps. So we're on a new pattern piece, straps. And these are going to be fairly simple, mostly just for the sake of time. And they're also really personal preference, so you can build them however you want to build them. So I'm going to do the max width of the strap at the top here. And then I made the length of the strap to be 3/4 the length of my pack. So we will just make the top part here first. And part of the reason I'm making this square here is mostly just for reference later. It's easier to make squares because you can modify the sizes and stuff of them. So now I will set a point midway, I believe it's this tool, yes, between these 2 points, and then I can set another line here as a reference of backpack height minus actually I might change that. Let's do strap length, and the bottom quarter of this will be where it tapers, and then I will set this line here to be 3/4 of that. There. Anyway, so now that I have this, I can draw another point on either side of here that is half of the minimum width, which this might seem a little convoluted, but it'll make sense in just a second here. Alright. And then we'll draw a line between these 2 points. And now we have our strap. So it starts out its max width, it goes approximately 3/4 of its length, and then it tapers down to its min width. I did that because I plan on having 1-inch webbing on this, and that's pretty much it. And now, no matter what length I make this strap, these proportions will stay the same. So if you want your strap to taper more or taper less, you could easily just change it up. So say I wanted it to taper at half and half. Oops, if I can type straight. So see, now that'd be a much more tapered strap there. And you can play around with those settings when you're making it to see what looks right to you. But I think that looks pretty good about like that. Alright, so now that I have all the parts made, I'm going to go through how to start making this into a printable pattern. First thing you're going to do is go into detail, and you want the workpiece tool, and start in the lower left corner and just start clicking your points. When you get to these curves, click on the curve itself, because if you click here, it'll draw a straight line. So click on the curve, and this is again why it has to be done left to right. So when you do these curves, that's why I did the curves the way I did. If you come up on a curve and it's going the wrong direction, say it's curving right to left, just hold down Shift and it'll reverse the direction of that curve for you. Point. And once you have all the points selected, hit Enter, and it kind of brings up this little menu for you. The seam allowance, we'll do that on the next screen, and hit OK. So now, if you go into the details screen, you have your pattern piece. And if you double click on this, yep, maybe not. There we go. If you right click on the piece, you can go to options, and this is where you can put your seam allowance in. I'm going to do a 1/4 inch seam allowance because I didn't factor a seam allowance into my pattern. This just does it automatically for you. You can also turn off where the seam allowance goes. I'll go over that when I get to the gusset, but it's pretty straightforward. Internal pass. This is where you would use the internal pass tool if you have, like, say, an inner pocket or an inner seam of some kind. But let's go to labels. We're going to call this front. Oh, sorry. Letter A. Name. Front / back. And I'm going to put 2 on here. This information here goes into the label. I have a template here, if I can find it. Basic label. And I'll see if I can put a copy of this in the description, because I found this on a forum post, mostly because I didn't want to go through and find all this. Since we're not cutting on a fold, we're going to remove that, and I always remove basically everything but the date, the name, and the cut quantity. So now if I hit apply, and we'll go to label and mark this detail label visible. Okay, so now you have this little yellow box that'll print off, and it tells you this is pattern piece A, it's the front and back, cut 2 of these. And I always put the date on these just because, like, especially for a garment or something like that, you know, if you made this up for yourself in, 10 years ago, it might change in size. You can always take that off if you don't want it. And once that's done, you go back to the draw tool, you go to your next piece, and repeat the steps. I'll go ahead and get all of these made, and then I'll get back to you when I do the seam allowance for the gussets, and I need to turn off part of that. So I'll see you in a minute. Alright, so on this bottom gusset, I marked placement on fold, so that way when I go to put on the label here, I'll take off the original cut quantity, and I'll put cut quantity on fold. So when you do the seam allowance on these, everything's based off the points. So from B to B1, everything is fine. And then I'm going to make my fold on B2. So before I want the current seam allowance, after I want 0, and then from B3 before I want 0, and then after I want the current seam allowance. So if I hit OK there, and you look at this, there's no seam allowance from B2 to B3, and that's where your fold will be. And on my label here, I'll make it bigger. Part B, bottom gusset, cut 1 on fold. And then there's the date. So I'll go ahead and get the rest of these done, and I'll get back to you. Alright, I noticed when I was doing the pocket here, I should probably talk about this. So on this pocket piece, because I made kind of multiple parts in one pattern piece, you don't have to use all of a pattern piece when you're making a detail. So if I go to new detail piece, I already made the top of the pocket here, so I'll do the bottom side. So this here will be the main body of our pocket. And if I go to details, you can see where I've got the pocket top right here already. And then I can find, and also you can drag these detail pieces around once you have them made. So then I will go in here and I'll do my seam allowance and add my labels. And you can use whatever naming convention you want. I'm using a dash behind with a number behind it, since this is technically piece D, but it's in multiple parts. So I'll call this pocket body. I hit OK. And so you can see now I've got my seam allowance and all my parts. Alright, I'll go ahead and finish up the straps here, and I'll get back to you. Alright, now that I have all my details made, you can see here's the front and back, the gusset, the pocket body, pocket top, the tabs, the straps. Everything's in place. I've got the number I need to cut for each one. So now I'm going to move on to how to get this into a printable form. So if you go to layout up here, I usually try to set this to be the size and width as close as I can to like I should say the smallest I can get it. That's mostly just my own like OCD, I guess, but you can set it however you want. And I usually have it auto crop the length, because that way you don't end up with a bunch of print off a bunch of white sheets that you don't need. And so then you just, once you have this set, which I think this will be pretty close, we'll find out. Hit OK, and so see now it's made 2 pages front and back, so, or not front and back, but 2 pages. I'm gonna go ahead and trim down this left side here a little bit. So I'll go back into my settings and I'll make my width, let's say 25. That looks like a good number. And if it's too small, the program will actually tell you, so I could probably even go in a little smaller here. So we'll do 20. And see, now it went into 3 pages, so I'll probably make just a little bit wider, because overall this doesn't matter too much for how we're going to print this, unless you have like a large format printer, and then maybe it might matter to you. So we'll leave it at 25, I guess. We'll try. And there's different rules for how it puts us together. So I'm going to try this, big, middle, small, see if that makes a difference. I usually just play around with this until I'm happy with what I end up with. So we'll try descending area, see if that makes any difference. And I think that looks good as far as space usage on the page. So the next thing you're going to do is you're going to export it. So go to export original layout. And for me, I will put this into packs. There's a couple different formats you can go with depending on what you're trying to do. SVG is a vector graphic that you can resize it. I usually you can go to as PDF. I usually go with a tiled PDF, and I set it for letter size because that's letter size paper. I'm in the States, so that's what I would print off. And so then I just go ahead and hit OK. Alright, so it doesn't look like much right now, but if you zoom out a little bit here, you can see that it prints this off in a grid. So you can then take this letter size template and print off, there's 28 pages because this is obviously kind of a big pack, or big compared to 8 by 10 paper size. But then you can go through and tape all these together and cut your pack out, or cut your pattern out to be the proper size. I said it gets a little tedious at times, and like I said, this is 28 pages worth of paper, so that's a lot of paper. But I mean, compared to like either paying someone to print it in large format or trying to do all this like by measuring it, this is just really the better way to go, I think. One tip that I have is that I always save my printer paper. Like if I've printed something off on one side and I don't need that anymore, I save that. So when I print my patterns, I print on the back side of it, because since I'm cutting out anyway, it doesn't matter if the back side is white or not. And that's pretty much everything there is to know, at least that I know currently on Seamly2D. If you have any questions, leave them down in the comment section below. If you have any comments on things I could do better, because again, most everything I've learned on this program has been like trial and error. There's a few things I've had to go to the forums for. Their manual has gotten a lot better, because when I first started, the wiki page for their manual was non-existent. But I went on there just the other day and checked it, and it's a lot more fleshed out. If anybody who develops Seamly2D knows, I would really like to find out what I need to do, if I need to put a point over here for this right angle tool. So if anybody knows that, then they can leave it down in the comments. I'd really appreciate it. If you found this video helpful or informative, please like, share, and subscribe. And please remember that knowledge is the only weapon that can't be taken from you. See ya.